Somewhere in the high desert of the American Southwest, carved into canyon walls and rising from sandstone floors, there are buildings that have stood empty for 800 years. Perfect masonry, 5 stories tall, aligned with the stars, and completely abandoned. The textbooks will tell you a civilization vanished here, a peaceful farming people who built one of the most sophisticated cultures in pre-Columbian North America, then simply walked away around 1200 AD. For more than a century, that was the story. A mystery with no ending, a lost person, a cold trail. Then ancient DNA was extracted from the bones they left behind. When the results came back, almost everything the textbooks had said fell apart. The Anasazi were never who we were told them to be. The society we called peaceful was held together by something else entirely. The dynasty we called non-existent had been ruling the same chamber for 9 generations. And the people we called vanished had never gone anywhere. What the DNA revealed is stranger than disappearance. A story of imported power, organized terror, and a civilization that ended not with a mystery, but with a migration. It has been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Before we start, what part of the world are you in? Drop a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe. Chaco Canyon sits in the high desert of northwestern New Mexico, a shallow cut of sandstone about 9 miles long, surrounded by nothing. No river of any consequence, no fertile valley, no obvious reason, looking at it today, why anyone would build anything there at all. And yet between roughly 900 AD and 1150 AD, it became the political, religious, and architectural center of a civilization that stretched across 90,000 square miles, an area larger than Ireland. They built great houses, more than 150 of them, massive stone structures rising up to 5 stories, some containing over 600 rooms, constructed with a standard of masonry that modern builders still find difficult to replicate. The walls were engineered with interior rubble cores, faced in precisely cut sandstone veneer. The rooms were aligned to track the movements of the sun and moon across decade-long cycles. At least one structure marked the summer solstice within minutes, not approximately, within minutes. They connected it all with roads, some of them 30 feet wide, running in perfectly straight lines across the canyon country for hundreds of miles. These were not trade routes in any ordinary sense. They climbed cliffs rather than going around them. They ignored terrain entirely. They were built to communicate something about the culture that made them, not simply to move goods from one place to another. At the heart of every great house sat the kivas, circular, sunken, ceremonial chambers built into the core of the structure, some small, some large enough to hold hundreds of people at a time. These were the gathering places, the altars, the rooms where whatever held this civilization together was reinforced generation after generation for nearly 300 years. This was not a scattering of villages. This was something organized, something with a center of gravity, and then, within a few generations, it stopped. The great houses were abandoned. The roads fell silent. And one of the most ambitious civilizations in prehistoric North America simply walked away and left it all standing. For most of the 20th century, the explanation that settled into textbooks was a comfortable one, a peaceful farming civilization, democratic, egalitarian, nearly utopian, a people who worshipped the sun and the corn and the seasons, who lived in harmony with the land and with each other, and who, for reasons unknown, eventually dispersed into the wider desert and faded quietly from history. They were given a name borrowed from the Navajo language, Anasazi, a word now understood to carry uncomfortable connotations, which is why many archaeologists today prefer Ancestral Puebloan. But for most of the last 100 years, Anasazi was the name attached to the mystery. And the mystery had a tidy shape. A civilization rose, a civilization vanished. Here are the ruins they left behind. The problem is that this entire story was built before anyone could read the bones, before ancient DNA analysis existed, before forensic taphonomy existed as a rigorous discipline, before anyone had sequenced the genetic material from the skeletons buried beneath those great houses and compared it to the populations living across the Southwest today. The textbook version of the Anasazi was constructed from pottery, architecture, and a great deal of wishful thinking, assembled in the absence of the most important evidence available. The bones had been sitting in museum drawers for over a century, largely unexamined, largely unread. The actual biological record of who these people were, where they came from, and how they related to the world around them was there the entire time, waiting. In the 2010s, ancient DNA sequencing reached a level of precision that finally made it possible to extract readable genetic material from Chacoan skeletal remains. And what it found did not gently revise the textbook version. It dismantled it completely. The first major study focused on Pueblo Bonito, the grandest great house in the canyon. The individuals buried in room 33, one of the most elite chambers in the structure, were not a random cross-section of the Chacoan population. They were closely related through the female line, across 9 generations, buried in the same chamber, in the same great house for more than 300 years, reed mats, turquoise by the thousands of pieces, conch shell trumpets carried from the Pacific coast. These were not the graves of equal citizens in a democratic farming community. These were the tombs of a hereditary ruling class. The textbooks had described a people without kings. The DNA described a dynasty. But it was the second finding that genuinely unsettled the field. When researchers compared the broader Chacoan genetic profile to the surrounding populations of the ancient Southwest, something did not align. The ancestral populations of the wider region shared a clear, consistent genetic signature. Hunter-gatherer and early farming lineages that had lived in the desert for thousands of years before Chaco rose were detectable in nearly every skeletal sample across the 4 corners. But at Chaco Canyon itself, and particularly among the elite burials, there were additional signals. Signals that did not match the surrounding populations. Signals that appeared to have entered the Chacoan gene pool from somewhere else, somewhere outside the Southwest entirely, concentrated in burials from the 9th through 12th centuries. Exactly the period when Chaco was transforming from a scattering of pit house villages into the most ambitious architectural project in prehistoric North America. Something had arrived at Chaco around 900 AD. Something that introduced a new genetic signal, a new architectural ambition, and apparently a new concept of how power should be organized. The question was obvious. Where did it come from? The DNA could point toward an answer, but not deliver one alone. To confirm the source, you need artifacts, you need architecture, you need the cultural fingerprints that travel with human beings when they move from one place to another. The researchers looked south, and what they found was not subtle. Macaw feathers arriving from tropical Mexico, copper bells traced to the Mesoamerican metallurgy tradition, cacao residue identified through biochemical analysis of ceramic fragments, a plant that grows only in the lowland tropics more than 1,000 miles away. These were not items that drifted north through casual exchange. They were prestige goods, objects that carried meaning, objects that belonged to a specific religious and political world far to the south. Then came the architecture. At Wupatki, on the western edge of the Chacoan world, archaeologists found a ball court. Not an approximation of one, an actual Mesoamerican ball court, of the kind used for ritual games played across the Valley of Mexico for more than 1,000 years. There was no tradition of ball courts anywhere in the Southwest. No local evolution that could explain its presence. It had been imported wholesale. Inside Chaco Canyon itself, at the great house called Chetro Quetal, a colonnaded facade ran along one of the central walls, columns matching precisely the architectural style of Mesoamerican temples hundreds of miles to the south. At some point later in Chaco's history, someone filled them in, as if the signature had become uncomfortable. But the original construction was unmistakable. Then came the teeth. In the elite burials at Pueblo Bonito, researchers found a single-filed tooth, a style of dental modification common across Mesoamerica and completely unknown anywhere in the Great Basin, the Rocky Mountains, or the Great Plains. There was no tradition of tooth modification north of Mexico. None. Not one documented case. And yet there it was. In the grave of a Chacoan elite, a signature that could only have been carried north by someone born and raised in Mesoamerica. The genetic trail and the material trail agreed. The signal was pointing toward the Valley of Mexico, and what researchers found there was darker than anyone had been prepared for. Before any of this evidence existed, one man had already been trying to explain what the Chacoan bones were showing. His name was Christy Turner, and for more than 30 years, his colleagues wished he would stop. Turner had trained as a forensic consultant for American law enforcement. He knew what human bones looked like when treated with care after death, and he knew what they looked like when treated as something else. The Chacoan bones had not been buried. They had not been cremated. They had been dismembered, broken, burned, and scattered. The damage matched, with disturbing precision, the damage Turner had seen on animals butchered for food. He built a forensic checklist. 6 criteria had to be present before he would conclude that a skeletal assemblage showed evidence of cannibalism. Burning on the backs of skulls but not the faces, consistent with a head placed on a fire while the brain was still intact. Anvil abrasion, the scraping pattern left when a defleshed bone is smashed between stones to extract marrow. Cut marks from stone tools at the joint endpoints, where tendons hold muscle to bone. Pot polish, a fine abrasive sheen left on bone fragments stirred inside ceramic cooking vessels. Fresh bone fracture patterns. And the 6th, most telling criterion, the systematic absence of vertebrae, the richest source of marrow in the human body, pulverized in nearly every processed assemblage. Gone. Applied to the Chacoan material, the results could not be dismissed. Nearly 300 individuals across dozens of sites. Men, women, children, infants, processed identically to the way Chacoan hunters processed deer and rabbit. 90% of the remains are found in or near Chacoan ceremonial centers, and the timing was exact. The signature appeared almost precisely when Chaco rose. It vanished almost precisely when Chaco fell. That kind of pattern does not happen by accident. The gap between butchering and consumption was where the debate lived for more than 20 years. Turner's checklist could prove processing. It could not prove consumption. That distinction mattered, and his critics held on to it. In 1997, the gap closed. At Cowboy Wash in southwestern Colorado, excavators found the remains of 7 individuals meeting every one of Turner's 6 criteria. And in the hearth at the center of the community, alongside the cooking vessels, they found something else. A scoprolite, desiccated human feces preserved by the desert climate. Biochemist Richard Marlar designed a test for a single protein, human myoglobin. It exists only in skeletal muscle. It cannot appear in human feces through any mechanism other than one, consumption of human skeletal muscle by another human being. Marlar ran the test 6 times, in triplicate, over several weeks, with every possible control in place. Every result came back positive. Cannibalism at Cowboy Wash was no longer a hypothesis. It was a biochemical fact. And with it confirmed, the broader Chacoan pattern locked into place. This was not starvation. The Chaco era was a period of agricultural plenty. This was not warfare. The great houses sat in an unusually peaceful landscape. Something organized had produced this pattern, and the DNA had already pointed to what that something was. The Valley of Mexico in the centuries before Chaco's rise was a world coming apart. Teotihuacan had collapsed. The Maya were entering a crisis. Power was fragmenting, and populations were moving. The religious traditions of Mesoamerica were looking for new ground. Those traditions had been built on blood. For centuries, theocratic elites had maintained authority through a system that made violence sacred. The universe required blood to function. Priests consumed the flesh of those sacrificed, investing themselves with divine authority. The ceremony was public. The message was unambiguous: comply or become the next offering. This was not an aberration. It was architecture, a social structure engineered to make resistance unthinkable. Transplanted to the Southwest, this system did not need large numbers to function. It needed a small, ruthless founding group and a population that could be made to understand what non-compliance looked like. The forensic record fits that model precisely. Concentrated, catastrophic events. Entire families processed in a single night, bodies left in ceremonial rooms where everyone across the region would know what had happened and understand exactly why. The purpose was not food. The purpose was a message. It needs to be said clearly. The Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and Rio Grande Pueblo communities have contested this interpretation for decades, and they have been right to do so. Cannibalism accusations have been used throughout American history to dehumanize Native peoples, and what the DNA now confirms is precisely what those communities have always insisted. The cannibalism at Chaco was not a feature of Puebloan culture. It was what had been done to Puebloan culture by an imported ruling class that used a borrowed religion to hold power for 2.5 centuries. The Chacoan world was not built on consent. It was held together by terror. And terror has an expiration date. The expiration date arrived from several directions at once. Tree ring analysis shows the warming trend that had sustained Chacoan agriculture for 3 centuries broke between 1130 and 1180 AD. Prolonged drought, colder winters, drier summers. The rainfall patterns that had allowed maize to grow in soils that should never have supported it began to fail season after season. Chaco had always been structurally vulnerable, no reliable water source in the canyon, everything sustained by surplus flowing inward from outlying regions. When those regions stopped producing, the ritual core starved, the tribute stopped, the coordination collapsed. The cannibalism signature disappeared almost exactly when the drought began. After 1180, it essentially stopped appearing in the record, not gradually. The system that had produced those remains for a quarter of a millennium simply ceased. Within a few decades, the great houses were being abandoned, not destroyed, not burned, abandoned. The residents walked away and left their homes standing. By 1280, the depopulation was underway. By 1300, the Four Corners region was effectively empty. But empty is not the same. The people moved south and east, following the rivers that still ran. The Rio Grande and the Little Colorado, down to the mesas and fertile valleys where farming remained possible in a drying world. They carried the knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and masonry that had sustained their ancestors, and they left behind the ceremonial centers of a system that was no longer worth preserving. The oral traditions of the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and Rio Grande Puebloans had been telling this story accurately for 800 years, but the academic world simply refused to listen. The Anasazi did not vanish. Their descendants have been living in plain sight the entire time. The question was never where they went. The question was why anyone ever believed they had gone at all. A civilization was called lost, while its descendants farmed the same valleys, performed the same ceremonies, observed the same skies, and carried in their bodies the exact biological record of the builders of the great houses. The oral traditions told this story accurately for 800 years. The DNA did not discover something new. It confirmed something that had never actually been forgotten, except by the people who later decided the story needed an ending it didn't have. It took a laboratory to make the rest of us listen. Those 5-story buildings are still standing, still perfect, still empty. Not a monument to the people who disappeared, but a monument to the people who decided to leave.